they could do a great job of that, and they could identify, strategy and mission and vision and all of those pieces. But what beats them down over the course of time is how people react to things that they care about so deeply and they're working so hard on, and then they get these reactions that are very disheartening.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Irrespective of whether you are an owner who would like changes in your organization or a leader trying to convince the owners or boards for transformational changes, the journey of change is lonely. You might come across super enthusiastic collaborators who will lose interest if they don't see an immediate return. You might also come across several detractors who will take every effort to shut you down. The changes requires a deep understanding of the mindset and what drives people to identify the right team to lead the change initiatives. In today's episode, we have our guest, Laura Goodrich, who discusses how and where to begin the journey of change, especially if you have been facing resistance from your team. She also describes how to identify the initial champions and build the right team to take accountability, to lead the change and not be discouraged by detractors. Finally, she discusses strategies to lead change in various organizations, including where the team may be facing resistance from the owner or vice versa. Let me introduce Laura to you. Laura Goodrich is an expert on transformation and the future of work. She has over 20 years of experience as an executive coach. She is recognized by Thinkers 360 as the top 20 thought leaders in transformation, future of work, change, culture, and technology. Her global perspectives on workforce dynamics and change have earned her the reputation as someone who can create positive outcomes in even the most challenging workplace dynamics. She is recognized as the 10 most inspiring business women to watch in 2020. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Of course, it's our pleasure. We are super excited to learn about your insights in change management. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
Absolutely. I'll take you back in time. Quite a number of years ago, I was working with the chief operating officer of a biomed company. And this organization was transitioning from being a smaller organization to significantly larger. It was happening quickly. And this senior leader was seeing that there was a lack of focus on the outcomes that they want. And I began to really see what he was talking about. In my conversations with people, I recognized that they had tremendous clarity on what they didn't want to have happen and all the things that they hoped that they wouldn't lose, but they really lacked clarity on the outcomes that they wanted on an individual level. And that really began my work in helping leaders and organizations develop the mindset and really have, and we define mindset as the assumptions, methods, and beliefs that people are operating with, to really ensure that that mindset was intentionally focused on the outcomes that individuals wanted. That was critical. You can call out a vision as an organization, but if you don't help people and empower people to gain that clarity, that natural orientation around focusing on fear and the things that you don't want, will become major obstacles to the growth and development and actual change that you need. And that experience, while it was way back then, continues to inform everything that we do, is how do we help organizations do just that?
Love it. So you have quite a background there. You have had some experience with biomed, then taking the organization from small to larger, and obviously change management is a pretty exciting space. So we are going to dig into all of that. But before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest that come on the show. And that is going to be, Laura, your perspective on business growth.
Right now, I think we really have to recognize that we're in the midst of an explosively fast business transformation, and few industries will be exempt. And so change and innovating has always been very difficult work. It's bound to be more difficult given the last year that we've been through and the dynamic nature of change that we're in the midst of. So difficult doesn't mean that you don't do it. In fact, I will say it's those leaders that address this head on and intentionally empower the right leaders to lead the way and create accountability, one leader and one team at a time, that will enable the organization to change, to innovate, to bring in new ways of operating as a means by which to be successful.
Oh, that's amazing. And you are so spot on with respect to the innovation being difficult and addressing the change head on. From our experience, obviously, we go through a lot of different transformation projects as well. And this is the differentiator that we see in the leaders. So we see two different leaders typically when we work with them. One, they are crystal clear in aligning the organization for the change, and they know from the get-go how to do that. But some leaders really struggle with that. And their biggest question is always going to be where to begin. What can they do to start the change in their organization with so much at stake, with so much resistance? And obviously, you have a lot of trust at stake as well. So what would be your thought process in starting the journey for change? How do you start that mindset, Laura?
It's an interesting thing because I had a senior leader that just recently said to me, Laura, we attempted something like this and it wasn't as successful as we hoped it would be. And I said, tell me about what you did. And what he described was a very common thing. They would go out, they would randomly identify, let's say 10 people to begin the process. Well, in our work, we have come to recognize that as it relates to change and innovation, 10% of any given group is what we call ambassadors. They want to be a part of that change. They see the need for it. They're itching, if you will, to be a part of it. 50% fall into the category of backseat sitters. They're neither negative nor positive. They have a tendency to be focused on the task or the job at hand. And 30% fall into the category of what we call detractors. And detractors are very vocal. They're very resistant to new and different things. And they have a tendency to get people stirred up. Now, imagine for a moment that you just randomly selected 10 people, let's say 10 leaders, to be a part of the opening moves that you're going to make. Now you've got a 30% of that group is very vocal and very inclined to be obstacles to where you're going. And they are trying as hard as you might be to gather the attention of that more neutral middle group. You can see right there that the dynamics are such that it's going to be very difficult to get that forward momentum. And the forward momentum is critical, particularly in the beginning. So knowing who to begin with, who are your ambassador leaders, who are your ambassador employees, and then similarly, how can you engage them intentionally in working with that middle, more neutral group and helping them see the vision and really empowering them to be a part of the plan and the process moving forward.
Okay, interesting insight there. And I am going to add some of the things from my experience. So obviously, I completely agree that, 10% are going to be slightly more entrepreneurial folks. They are really itching for that change. And then 50% are going to be sort of the backseat taker is what you mentioned, I guess, if I recall correctly. And then 30% are going to be the detractor. But from my experience, when we look at these 10% ambassadors or champions,
20% we said.
20%. Okay, 20%. Okay, now we are aligned there. So 20% of the ambassadors or the entrepreneurial folks, and I don't know if this is aligned with your experience as well. Typically, with any of the digital transformation, ERP implementation, these are very rigorous transformation initiated that requires a lot of work from the organization perspective. Typically, when you are going to look at these champions and entrepreneurial folks, they are super excited about making change, but they also believe in instant gratification. Okay, they cannot persist. Let's say if you have to spend 6 months or 9 months to take advantage of the work that they are putting in right now. I don't know if you have seen this in your world as well, but typically from our experience, these are the guys who sort of fall off from that excitement as well. So I know that, Laura, you have a lot of stories that you might be able to tell. So what has been your experience with these ambassadors or champions? Are they always excited about the change? And if they are, let's say, not excited, what have you done to make sure that they are always being excited, assuming that you are choosing them for your initial team? I guess that's going to be another question that I'm going to have.
Sam, this is a really important piece. And this is what, I shared with you a story from so long ago. And, as time has gone on, more than anything, what we have been is keen observers of human behavior in this space. And we began to ask the questions, what can we put in play and as a part of a process to ensure that these ambassadors have the needed help that they need overcoming the frustrating obstacles and understanding the behavior that they're experiencing? How do we create an environment where they're coming together and they are figuring out as a cohort group how to be successful? And then how do we use stories? And we believe stories are a very critical part of the process. How do we use stories and we keep those stories going over the course of time as a means by which to inspire, to create deeper understanding? So these are all pieces that are a part of our process. One-on-one coaching for those leaders to help them overcome the challenges and frustrations that they're experiencing and understand. So often they say to us, I don't understand this, but we do, because it's a space that we've seen so often. So having a partner that you can work with one-on-one coaching, then we bring that cohort group together and we bring them together a couple times a month for very brisk 30-minute sessions where they have the opportunity to identify what are the burning issues that they as a cohort group are experiencing. And we really facilitate a coaching conversation with that group. And so they have their own stories then, their stories of success and frustration, but they are coming together as a cohort group and learning how to navigate this shift in mindset is critical. And then the other thing that we blend in there is stories, small bite-sized stories that are spaced over time that keep the project top of mind, and deepen that learning. And these all came about as we encountered challenges, as leaders would say, I'm so frustrated, I don't understand this. Well, we could address that with coaching. I feel so alone in this process. We address that by bringing together a cohort group. We help them identify their ambassador leaders so that we can create that forward momentum with that group and keep that momentum or that energy up with them. And then we use stories as a means by which to keep that project, in your case, that ERP project, top of mind and the people side of things, helping them gain insight on the people side, because the technologies, no matter how fantastic the technologies are, no matter how much the gains that they're going to experience, the biggest obstacle that people encounter are humans, are human beings. And there are a lot of underlying thinking. There's underlying thinking that is unconscious that makes it extremely problematic to lead the way. And that is where we can help with that, because honestly, most of the time, these leaders are very successful, can be very successful at leading the project if there were no human beings involved, right? I mean, they could do a great job of that, and they could identify, strategy and mission and vision and all of those pieces. But what beats them down over the course of time is how people react to things that they care about so deeply and they're working so hard on. And then they get these reactions that are very disheartening.
Yeah, could not agree more. And change is obviously a very emotional experience. And as you correctly pointed out, that it doesn't matter what kind of technology you get and tools you get. It's really people side of the problem that is always going to be mission critical. And I also agree with some of the things that you mentioned. Does not matter how compelling your vision or mission maybe, if that is not getting executed, it's not getting implemented, people are not taking that to their heart, then obviously it's not going to work. So let's dig into some of those stories. And especially I'm interested in knowing what is the process of selecting the right people. How do you identify which are going to be the people who are going to be the ambassadors or the entrepreneurial people who are really going to take this mission forward for our executives? And as you correctly pointed out, that when somebody is going to be super entrepreneurial, they are going to have their own dreams and goals. So aligning that with the corporate goal becomes a little bit of challenge in my experience. So what has been your process in these stories in aligning that, in explaining them why they should care for the corporate goals as opposed to their own goals?
Well, the quick answer to that is you want to, really define the vision and mission and corporate vision. And then by way of coaching, ask people how they see themselves fitting into that. What is their view of it and what outcomes do they want? We always drive to outcomes, and we ask these individuals to share the outcomes that they want and to write them down and to speak them. This gives us and helps us make that shift from resistance, that unconscious resistance, to an intentional focus. But there's a bigger question here that you asked, is how do we identify these individuals? And this is dangerous territory, because a lot of times people will say, okay, these are our ambassador leaders. They will help us and they will be charged with the success of, let's say, this digital transformation or this digital addition that we're making. The challenge is that we select people that we like. We select people maybe that their kids play soccer and our kids play soccer. We have, right? Yeah. We've got commonalities, and that's often what, the way that people would make those decisions. And that's dangerous territory, because it's not asking the question, who is forward leaning, who is very future focused, and who has the mindset, the assumptions, and the methods and beliefs that will help us lead the way. Now, we have identified this group in many different ways, in the most rudimentary way you could possibly imagine, an org chart and a yellow highlighter.
Yeah.
That's one way. But again, it's very difficult to be objective in those situations. We have partners that we work with that have now very beautifully designed assessments of adaptability, where we can go in and we can determine in a much more objective way who these people are, so we know where to begin. And that really depends on the appetite of the organization. Some will say, by all means, let's do this assessment. And others will be like, no, we are quite sure we can do this. Or we'll start small. They'll say, we know for sure we've got 6 leaders. I've carefully selected these 6 leaders. I know that they're ambassadors, that they are a part of the change. I've been observing them for a period of time. These are the people that we'll begin with. We would much rather start small than to guess wrong in these opening moves as to who we work with. Now, I want to share a story. I had a conversation with an automotive organization out of the Nordic countries. As many of the automotive organizations, they've been around for a long time, very much a legacy business. And you can see they need to change and transform in very dynamic ways as they have mandates to transition to both e-vehicles as well as autonomous technology. Yeah. So this organization elected to go through a more formal process of assessing adaptability and mindset for change. And we had conversations about the 20-50-30. So we anticipated that they would be able to identify that 20%. What they did is that they let people self-elect themselves as an ambassador. So they went to this is a large organization, right? Yeah. And so I'm going to just throw numbers out for the sake of throwing the numbers out, maybe 5,000 leaders that they had. Yeah. They had 800 that self-elected, that identified themselves as an ambassador, that had the mindset to help change. They then assessed those people that self-elected. So let's be clear, the detractors are not a part of this group more typically, right? They're not going to put their hands up more typically. They at least have that wherewithal to know that they're not necessarily going to lead change. They did this assessment. I mean, they literally quieted their voice when they spoke with me, because they said there was a very small percentage that actually, with the assessment, were identified as having a mindset for change and being highly adaptive. I said, what number? How many of the 800? 23. 23 leaders of 800 leaders that said they were ambassadors of change, that had a mindset for change. Only 23 by way of assessment had the components and the behavioral characteristics. I mean, if that doesn't gather your attention, I don't know what could, right? I mean, that horrified. They were horrified. I mean, they're like, oh my gosh. I mean, this is going to be the hardest thing we have ever done, because we have such a small group to begin with to lead the way.
Yeah. So interesting story there. And obviously we need to translate this a bit in some of the SMB organizations as well. Obviously, the bigger organizations have their own structure, their own way of operating things. But when we look at some of these SMB manufacturers, they are very different organizations. Some of them are, let's say, family owned. The leadership is going to have its own problems. And it's not as diversified, because typically this is going to be probably, let's say, one owner owned. Obviously, there are going to be some of the management functions as well, but they are probably not going to have as much control overall. So there could be 2 scenarios. Number one, if this leadership is bought in with the change, we see that leadership wants to do it, but they are afraid because they have had these employees, let's say, for 30 years, and they have not seen something like this in last 30 years, and they are afraid of change. And the second scenario is going to be where, let's say, executives are on board with the change, but it's very hard to communicate with the owner, because the owner does not believe, let's say, in digital transformation or digital technology. So in your experience, would this experience be similar to what the story that you mentioned? Is it going to be different? Can you touch from your perspective how you would overcome the change resistance in these 2 scenarios?
All right. Those are really important scenarios. So let's begin with the first one.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, maybe I'm going to get them mixed up, so, pardon me if I do, but in the first example, you've got people that have a tremendous amount of experience. You've got, individuals with 30 years and leaders that have been charged with leading in a new direction. So here they are looking at a team, and they're encountering a lot of resistance. And frankly, the enjoyment of the work experience has been dramatically reduced. It's not uncommon. I'm thinking of a particular leader. This happened to have been in a healthcare setting. I mean, she came to me because she wanted out. I mean, she was miserable beyond words. Yeah. And we talked about the 20-50-30, and she said, well, the 20%, they don't have anywhere near the experience as those others. So how in the world do I empower them?
Yeah.
And I said, what if you just, let's focus right here. We're not talking about the job, the day-to-day job and the tasks that are involved in the day-to-day job. We're talking about who will help you lead the way forward. Yeah. And so that's another project in and of itself. And this is where people sort of miss the mark. If we looked at how we shift the mindset of our organization as a project, that it was as critical as any project, any product that we're bringing to the marketplace, that's an important place to begin. So with this particular leader, we identified the ambassadors on her team, and we identified that neutral backseat sitters, the 50%. We put together a plan for how to tuck those ambassadors in as close as possible, really share the vision, share the direction, begin the process of putting together a strategy plan and the sharing of stories with them, and how would they engage with that middle group. And the whole experience scared her to death because there was no focus on the very individuals that had the most experience.
Interesting. So this is the story in which the leader is actually willing to change. They are trying to figure out what they can do to change the organization. So in this particular case, obviously, leader is going to be afraid in doing it the right way so that they don't experience as much disruption. So in the other case, the leader is very closed-minded, and we see this in a lot of family-owned situation. And the closed mindset could be because they might be done with their life, or they don't want to see any more changes before they get retired. It could be so many different variables or factors that they don't necessarily want to change, or it could be just the ego. I mean, we see that being a factor as well. So in this particular case, let's say you have the employees or your ambassadors who are willing to make the change, but as soon as they pitch to the leader is not willing to buy the change. So what would you do in this case? In this case, I mean, you are pitching to a leader who's not willing to change as opposed to leader actually driving the change.
Very good question. And in fact, I will tell you, it is the most common question that I am posed. So when I do sessions and I've got, individual contributors as well as, leaders within an organization, the question they'll ask is, what do we do if our very senior leadership does not see the need and just see us continuing on as business as usual? And that is a very common scenario. So I always say, begin small and ask for an opportunity to work with a small group of identified ambassador leaders, design a project or a pilot, and really demonstrate the outcomes that can be created through that process. Nothing speaks more loudly to leaders of an organization than actual outcomes. And that's why in our process, we are always looking at outcomes that can be measured. And so that is a way to influence a leader that is resistant to change. That scenario, I'm guessing you see a lot of it. That scenario is an extremely common one, and I will offer likely to be even more prevalent in this place of transformation that we're in. And the story that I often share is that when I graduated from college, there were 3 CEOs of 3 very successful organizations at the time that addressed the class. And one of them stood forward and became very stern with the group. And he said, don't listen to what they're saying in the newspapers and in the media. It is exaggerated. There will always be a typewriter on the desks of business people. for the rest of our lives. And of course, that dates me, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it also speaks to us about, and so you said maybe it's just that we're bullheaded or people are bullheaded. And I actually think it's a couple things, but in many cases, it's that we're proud that these leaders are proud of what they've created. It is really a baby. And suggesting that it's different is suggesting that that baby is no longer has value. And that's another piece in the process, is that it's very, very important that you continue to acknowledge what has been, continue to acknowledge the success it's created, how good it was. And then once again, reiterate the need and necessity to change and to innovate and to transform. And there has to be a lot more repetition in these things than people assume. A lot of times they'll say, well, we did a presentation and we brought everyone together and we had a town hall and we told them once. And it really just has to be communicated again and again. And in particular, if you've got those founding leaders or those leaders and employees that are established, that have been there for a long time, that are proud of and justifiably proud of what they've created, it's important to stop before plowing forward again and again and again, and acknowledge what they have created, and then speak very directly to the need and necessity for going in a new direction. People a lot of times underestimate how often you've got to do that as a way to get forward.
Yeah, and fascinating story there. And obviously seeing the future and having that vision is very important. How your market segment is going to change, that is equally important for executives as well as for the team. But let's go back to the discussion that we were having about the inexperience in the team and leaders having this fear of change because they don't know if they can trust them. And also one of the comments that we discussed is the outcomes. If you can prove the outcome, obviously it's going to be easy for anyone to be able to get convinced on the story. So in your example, if you do a pilot and if you can prove that no, the pilot had results, and the only thing I am trying to do is I am simply trying to scale this pilot to slightly bigger level. And I'm actually going to give you the data. But in most cases, unless you are talking about a closed deal, okay, the outcomes are going to be very different. The outcomes that, let's say, the newer team may be selling to their executives may be completely different from what outcome they are hoping. And there is going to be a little bit of disconnect there in terms of the expectation of the outcome. So initially, when you said that, you know what, create your vision. Now, when you create your vision, now these guys, the newer guys especially, okay, they are going to have very different expectations overall, because experience does teach a lot of things to us in terms of, how to be conservative. And in business, especially in case of finance, you need to be slightly conservative. You can't go, okay, today I'm doing project A and tomorrow I'm going to do project B, and I have no idea how much financial risk that is going to have. So how do you align these two? What is going to be the process? Do you compromise your vision? Because now you have identified your champions who have very futuristic idea that is not proven yet. I know that we are going to start small, but we have to start with some sort of vision. So do you change the vision of the organization compliant with your champions? Or would you rather tell them that, you know what, if you are not aligned with my vision, you are fired tomorrow. I'm going to find people who are going to be aligned with my vision, and then I'm going to bring the change. So what would you do, Laura, let's say if you were the executive in this case?
Boy, I mean, that is such a complicated, situation. I can tell you that I see all of these things coming out with, there's no simple or easy answer. In terms of innovation, I have seen organizations try so hard to implement innovation and come across such resistance that they will actually create another organization altogether that becomes charged with innovation, because the cultural the culture of the original organization is such that it just devours ideas and innovation. And so they will completely separate them out. I worked with another organization that they also was a very legacy business. And this at first blush, the senior leaders said and saw the need for change and innovation, though one of the points that I make about this, Sam, is talk is cheap.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say they want innovation, and the very people that they hire to bring in, and we're seeing a lot of this going on, is that there's executives are being brought in from other industries that have been able to drive innovation. The very people that brought them in and that, were saying, we need you, they then become this unbelievable obstacle to actually bringing innovation in. That's why I say talk is cheap.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time doing right now is helping those innovators fashion their communication and their strategy for influencing those people that said they wanted innovation, but when it comes down to it, actually they wanted blue, not green. The innovation, right? That is very difficult. And then another example was an organization, they just couldn't they couldn't bring innovation in because they had such a large, dominant part of the organization that was well established and with 20 plus years of experience. And so they were driving it into their more junior employees and starting from that level, as opposed to starting at the top, which is a much more traditional way of looking at, mindset and changing. If you're thinking about it from a cultural standpoint, they couldn't get any, movement if they did that. So they were doing a really different angle. And, to be frank, I was just sort of brought in as to oversee that. It wasn't a project that I was a part of over the long haul. So I can't give you a long haul perspective on that, other than the fact that I thought it was absolutely fascinating that they had chosen to go the route that they had.
Yeah, so let's break this down for the digital transformation or the ERP initiatives a bit, right? So I don't know if you're going to have different stories or scenarios that you might be able to share, but let's say if you have a culture where you are trying to create a separate organization inside the organization because these people are slightly different than the rest of the organization, and you are probably trying to create a pilot, and once that pilot is successful, then you are going to be championing the cause inside the organization. So would you take this approach in case of your digital transformation initiatives as well? In case of ERP initiatives, would you look at different types of organizations? Do you have any sort of examples of different type of organizations where which approach is going to be more suitable? I don't know if you're going to have any stories around that to translate this insight for the digital transformation.
Well, what I would comment on this, Sam, is that when it comes to making the investment in technology, mindset is pretty much the last thing that is on the minds of leaders. At the point that they're doubling down on those purchases, they have really focused on the need and the necessity. So it's likely that they're getting pinched in the marketplace in some significant way. Very infrequently do these organizations bring these technologies in because they want to lead the way with them. Most of the time they're getting pinched. Something is quite painful, either in the marketplace, their competition or something. So once they've got they're in a world of hurt, they've found a solution that they believe is going to overcome that hurt. The last thing they've got on their mind is mindset. They have been now deeply ingrained in the research of that technology, and all they can see is that is going to be the saving grace for them to get away from that hurt. So it's an interesting piece. I spoke with an executive recently, just to give, give a scenario.
Yeah.
This was a entrepreneurial organization that found great success. A very large company purchased them, and in the very traditional sense, the founders stayed on for a couple of years. They're ready to exit stage left. The senior leader now, it has a very different style. So this organization did not have systems or processes. They were just shooting from the hip is how they did things. And now they're transitioning to a larger organization. And this leader said to me, I know how to lead this kind of change. And I'm sure he does. But the bottom line is that there'll be a lot of obstacles that are going to get in the way, obstacles that are going to get in the way of this transition to systems and processes. I'm sure you can, and you've seen this before, Sam. I mean, if you grew up in you grew up in a small town and everybody, you were used to having a potluck in the parking lot and, all of these things that are common in these smaller organizations. And now you're owned by a larger company that's going to be bringing their larger company processes in. I mean, there's nothing easy about that. And that's why, as I said to him, and then let's add the stress and strain of the pandemic and working remotely. And we've got layers upon layers of things that are happening right now that are going to make leading change something that has always been difficult, much more difficult. And I said to him, absolutely. You can spend all of your time overcoming the conflict and the confusion and all of these people issues, or you can bring in a third party to assist with that, where they can have private conversations where they're going to be more forthright and strategize about how to overcome the obstacles. Because a senior leader, it's not a good use of a very senior leader's time to be constantly reckoning with the people challenges.
Yeah.
That senior leader needs to be able to hold up that vision and that mission and that strategy. And at the same time, I make this point, I don't care who does it or who provides the support, but if you have identified your ambassador leaders, it is critical you provide support to them at this point, because one of the points that I bring up, Sam, in every conversation that I have is what we're seeing is that leaders are worn very thin right now. And when I make that point, Sam, I mean, you should just see the look on people's face, because we have so many levels of stress that we've been enduring over the long term. The very leaders that these senior leaders need to help them lead the way are worn so thin. And what happens when we're worn thin and burned out? I mean, the grass looks greener and the marketplace, the grass looks greener. And there's a lot of organizations that are looking for ambassador leaders. They are on the hunt for ambassador leaders. So the very leaders that you need to help you lead the way are at risk for departure at this point. And in the greater risk than departure is that they stick with you.
Yeah.
And they're so burned out and so worn thin that they are not going to be able to lead the way. They don't have enough gas in the tank to drive forward.
Yeah, those are amazing stories, and I can relate so much with them. I see them all the time. I think this conversation can go on, Laura, but that's it for today because we are about time. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts?
I do. My closing thoughts are this. You can leave mindset to chance. You can hope that everyone will see the value of innovation and the value of technological advances that you need to bring to the table. But hope is not going to be particularly helpful in light of all that we've been through. Like I mentioned, change has always been difficult, but we have been through a change and we are in transformation that will require an entirely new mindset, a new assumptions, new methods, new beliefs. And so if it is critical that you provide the support to the right leaders, that you know who's going to lead the way, and you operate very strategically in how you bring those ambassadors together and create accountability on their teams, and then really empower that middle, more neutral group to be a part of it. It's important to know where to start. It's important to place an effort toward it. It is a project, and it is as critical as any technology. It is as critical as any innovation that you're going to be bringing. It will make or break the opportunity that you're trying to create with a technology or an innovation or a change that you are implementing.
I could not agree more. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, as an executive, you are going to be worried about the financial control, operational control, market control. But if you really want to get ROI from your technology investment or from transformations, then you need to have mindset control. On that note, Laura, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating conversation.
You are more than welcome.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Laura, head over to gwtnext.com. It's gwtnext.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Amanda Prucheska, who discusses how to prepare for change with large transformation projects and why a continuous monitoring of emotional response is absolutely critical for the success of such projects. Also, the interview with Carol Marzouk from Leadership and Soul, who discusses how to uncover and correct lingering toxicity before it stunts your business growth. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.